Hey, welcome to That One Time, the place for unforgettable moments and stories worth sharing. Funny, touching, surprising, just like life itself. Grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's dive in. Eleanor Smith adored her son David, seeing him as the main reward of her life. At the same time, her relationship with her daughter Clara remained cool and distant. Clara grew up independent and self-assured, and her mother didn't feel the need to worry about her fate. All her anxiety and care were focused solely on David. Although David was a successful young man, his mother's anxiety knew no bounds. Eleanor Smith sincerely believed that without her constant control and help, her son simply wouldn't manage in life. This conviction was deeply mistaken, but any attempts by David to loosen her grip proved futile. In the end, he resigned himself to the constant hypercare, learning to exist under its pressure. The real difficulties began when David decided to tie the knot. Helen was the third chosen one introduced to his mother, and the previous two hadn't withstood Eleanor Smith's onslaught. Total control and endless nitpicking quickly ruined those relationships. Now David hoped that Helen would be more resilient. David prepared Helen in advance for the peculiarities of his mother's care, honestly warning her that they would have to live together. Helen, understanding that you don't choose your parents, accepted the news calmly. "I'll try to find common ground with your mother," she said. "After all, she gave life to the man I love, and for that, I'm ready to endure." However, Helen had no idea yet how sophisticated Eleanor Smith's nitpicking could be. Ahead of her lay the first meeting with her future mother-in-law on Saturday. David and Helen decided not to announce their engagement yet, so as not to escalate the situation. Helen was terribly nervous, realizing that her future with her beloved was at stake. She prepared carefully for the meeting, having learned everything about Eleanor Smith's tastes and dislikes from David beforehand. Helen baked her future mother-in-law's favorite honey cake, dressed up, and waited for David. He arrived with a bouquet of flowers, picked her up, and they headed to his house. Eleanor Smith was also preparing for the visit of the potential daughter-in-law, but her mood was initially negative. Even before seeing the girl, she was already sure that she wouldn't like Helen. In her mind, no one and nothing could ever take care of her son as well as she could herself. Eleanor Smith met them in the hallway, looking quite benevolent in an elegant dress and light makeup. However, Helen physically felt the coldness and rejection emanating from her. For the first time in her life, she so acutely felt unwelcome, but she wasn't going to back down. For the sake of her beloved, she was ready to endure any trials. During dinner, Eleanor Smith asked standard questions about family, housing, education, and work. Helen answered calmly and confidently. She had something to be proud of. She grew up in a good family. Her father was a colonel, her mother a surgeon. Helen herself graduated from medical school and worked successfully as a gastroenterologist in a private clinic. Helen's story made an impression on Eleanor Smith, as the previous candidates had been much simpler. One worked as a nail technician, the other as a saleswoman in a boutique. The mother-in-law liked that Helen came from a respectable family and had a good education. She might even have been ready to praise her, had it not been about the role of her David's wife. Overall, the dinner passed without overt conflicts. David drove Helen home and returned, knowing that an inevitable serious conversation with his mother was coming now. She was waiting for him in the living room, and it was clear from her face that Helen had somehow still displeased her. David internally prepared to defend his chosen one. "Mom, well, what is it? Not right again? What did Helen do to displease you?" He decided to go on the offensive immediately. His mother feigned surprise, asking why he thought so. David listed Helen's positive qualities. "Quite a nice girl, educated, cultured, pleasant to talk to. But there's always a but, isn't there?" his mother interrupted. "Yes, if not for one but, I think she's boring." This was such a ridiculous quibble that David couldn't help but laugh. "Mom, are you serious? Boring? Why did you decide that?" "I don't know. It just seems so," Eleanor Smith replied, clearly unable to find a more substantial reason. David understood that his mother was simply looking for a reason to criticize. How will you live with her? Have you thought about that? She continued. I'll live perfectly well, Mommy. Stop looking for a black cat where there isn't one, David said firmly. He reminded her that Helen was exactly the kind of woman she had always dreamed of him seeing: calm, well-mannered, cultured. David walked up to her, took her hands, and continued. I'm 32. I want a family and children. How much longer should I keep choosing? Eleanor Smith understood that her son was right and that it was high time for him to start a family, but the thought of having to share him with someone was unbearable. Even future grandchildren didn't warm her soul. She needed only him. You're right, son. It's time for you to get married, she began her usual song. It's just that I feel like you're still a little boy who needs his mother most of all, but you've grown up and your mother is no longer needed. Mom, don't say silly things, David gently objected. You always need me, and we'll live with you. I'm not going anywhere. We'll still talk, have dinner together, go shopping, go to the dacha. It's just that there will be one more person in our house, and maybe not just one over time. It's more fun that way, and you won't be alone when I go on business trips. David looked at his mother hopefully, and she couldn't bear his gaze. She had never been able to refuse her favorite. All right, get married, she finally said. I won't interfere. Mommy, I knew you were the wisest woman in the world, David exclaimed joyfully, hugging and kissing her. 2 months later, David and Helen got married, and Helen moved into her husband's house. The first few weeks went surprisingly smoothly. Helen couldn't even believe everything was so good. Eleanor Smith was welcoming and benevolent, chatted nicely with her daughter-in-law, and helped her around the house in every way. But then David left for a week-long business trip, and the peaceful life ended. The nitpicking poured down like from a horn of plenty. You're ironing David's shirts wrong. You didn't put enough salt in the soup. You put too much salt in the porridge. You put the cups in the wrong place. You can't sit in that armchair. That's David's armchair. Helen didn't understand how a person could change so much overnight, but she silently endured, redoing all her mistakes. The real nightmare began when Helen brought a kitten home. David had said they always had cats, and Helen hoped the fluffy baby would soften her mother-in-law. She had cleared the purchase with her husband, and he approved the idea. But Eleanor Smith met the new resident with hostility. Why did you bring this flea-ridden thing into the house? Don't you know I can't stand cat hair? You're doing this to spite me, she shrieked. And then Helen couldn't take it anymore. My dear Eleanor Smith, what are you trying to achieve? She asked calmly but firmly. That David and I divorce? That won't happen. We love each other. Helen continued, looking her mother-in-law directly in the eyes. I cleared the purchase of the kitten with your son, and he assured me that you always had cats in the house and that you would like this idea. But it turns out that you're ready to contradict even that just because I brought the kitten. She spoke calmly, but with unwavering confidence. The only thing you'll achieve with this attitude towards me is that we'll move out to a rented apartment and you'll be left alone. Does that option suit you? I don't think so. Helen finished her speech. So either we live peacefully or we leave. You can forget about us breaking up. I'm expecting a baby. Eleanor Smith looked at her daughter-in-law with completely different eyes. So you have a character, girl. Want to fight with me? Well, well, she thought to herself. But aloud she said something entirely different. I don't want you to leave. Maybe I am being a bit picky, but you must understand me. I'm a mother. I want my son to be happy. Helen replied, And do you think I came into his life to ruin it? Have I given you any reason to think so badly of me? No. Eleanor Smith turned to leave, but then turned back to her daughter-in-law. All right, let's live peacefully, especially since you shouldn't be getting upset, she said, and for the first time, notes of reconciliation sounded in her voice. After that conversation, Eleanor Smith indeed changed her behavior. She stopped picking on Helen about everything, tried to spend more time in her room to interact less with her daughter-in-law. Helen noticed that the kitten, named Jasper, often visited her mother-in-law, and she began to pick him up even more often than Helen herself did. Life in the house gradually improved. 2 years passed. Helen and David had a son, whom they named Edward after David's father. His father-in-law had been a policeman and tragically died in the line of duty when David was only 4 years old. Eleanor Smith always remembered her husband with warmth, while David barely remembered his father. Eddie grew up, and his grandmother often played with him and took him for walks. During this time, Helen took care of household chores. The mother-in-law's attitude towards her daughter-in-law hadn't essentially changed. She still disliked Helen, but now she did it silently. David worked a lot and often went on business trips. Their life flowed calmly and measuredly until unforeseen circumstances burst into it. David had to leave for another country for a whole month. Helen really didn't want to let him go, but the business trip was mandatory. A couple of days after his departure, Helen noticed that Eleanor Smith was acting strangely. She was quiet, not playing with her grandson. Gathering her courage, Helen decided to talk to her mother-in-law. "Eleanor Smith, is something bothering you?" Helen asked uncertainly. "Maybe something hurts? Tell me, I'm a doctor." The mother-in-law calmly replied that nothing hurt and everything was fine, but Helen didn't believe her and decided to observe her behavior. The next day, Helen accidentally overheard Eleanor Smith talking on the phone, asking for help. Helen didn't understand exactly what it was about, but she clearly heard the words, "I need your support." Eleanor Smith had many acquaintances and relatives, but she could only ask the closest ones for help. Helen called David. "David, you need to talk to Mom urgently. Something's going on with her, and she's not telling me anything," she said worriedly. "I heard her asking someone for help on the phone. Talk to her. Maybe she has health problems. I can help." "All right, dear Helen, I'll definitely talk to her today," David replied. He asked how things were at home in general. Helen repeated that his mother wasn't herself, and it worried her very much. David promised to call back in the evening after talking to his mother. In the evening, David reported that his mother's test results were bad. The doctor at the clinic insisted on urgent surgery, but his mother was scared. "Helen, try talking to her again," David asked. "I asked Mom to show you the results, and she seemed to agree. But show care and attention, you know her. For my sake, of course." "David, I'm worried about her myself," Helen replied. "I'll do everything I can." Entering her mother-in-law's room decisively, she said, "Eleanor Smith, I understand that you don't particularly like me, but please allow me to help you anyway." And then something completely unexpected happened. Eleanor Smith burst into bitter tears, which greatly frightened Helen. "Eleanor Smith, what is it? Is it that bad? Is it cancer?" Helen asked, filled with anxiety. "No," the mother-in-law replied through tears. "It's just that I turned to my daughter. She doesn't have time to go to hospitals with me. But that's understandable. I always only focused on David. She has reason to be offended by me." She continued sobbing. "My sister is also busy with her own things. My godmother and best friend are at the dacha, saying, 'You have children.' And it turns out that no one cares about me. And I'm afraid, you understand? Very afraid." Helen said softly, "All right, let's calm down. You'll tell me everything in detail." Eleanor Smith showed her the test results and said that the doctor insisted on urgent surgery, claiming that time had been lost and the outcome was unclear. Helen carefully studied the results and looked at her mother-in-law in surprise. "Which clinic were you at? Our local one?" she asked. "I don't see anything terrible, let alone irreversible, in your results." Helen continued confidently, "I'll call my gynecologist right now and we'll go for a consultation tomorrow. I'm sure this is some kind of mistake." "Really?" the mother-in-law asked with hope in her eyes. "Really," Helen confirmed. The next day, Helen and Eleanor Smith went to the medical center to see Helen's gynecologist friend. The doctor listened to the complaints, studied the results, and was extremely surprised by his colleague's recommendation for surgery. "Eleanor Smith, I assure you, you have no indications for surgery," he said. "I will prescribe you treatment, you'll undergo it, and everything will be fine." Eleanor Smith cried again, but this time from relief. "Helen, can you go see that specialist yourself?" the doctor asked Helen. "Let her explain why she scared your mother-in-law. You can't scare people like that." "Don't worry, Andrew, I'll handle it," Helen replied. When they left the center, Eleanor Smith stopped, took Helen's hand and said, "Dear Helen, please forgive me. I was very unhappy. I picked on you for no reason. I am guilty towards you." She started crying again. And you turned out to be the only person who came to my aid. Because if I had gone to the doctor with someone else, I would have been sent for surgery. No one would have bothered to investigate." The mother-in-law squeezed her hand tightly. "Thank you, my girl. Thank you so much. I promise you, I will be the most loving mother-in-law in the world." Helen also couldn't hold back tears, completely not expecting such an admission and warmth. "It's all right, Eleanor Smith," she said. "We're one family, and we should help and support each other." The mother-in-law said thoughtfully, "In life, it's often the opposite. Strangers support and help, while your own people don't have time." "Well, then we're an exception to the rule," Helen smiled. "Let's go home. Eddie is waiting for us there with my mother." Suddenly, Eleanor Smith stopped abruptly and looked at her daughter-in-law seriously. "Listen to me now. Just don't interrupt," she said. "I want to thank you, so that you see not only in words, but also in deeds that I have changed. I will sign over my share of the apartment to you so that you and David are always on equal footing. That will be fair." Helen tried to object, but, "All right, don't argue with me," the mother-in-law interrupted playfully but strictly. "On this matter, I will be categorical, strict, as a mother-in-law should be." She smiled and gently hugged her daughter-in-law.